Hi, good afternoon. I'm Joe Conason. I'm the editor-in-chief of the National Memo. I used to work at the New York Observer. Oh, thank you. 2 claps. That's about as much as... the only qualification I have for this panel is that I covered Donald Trump ever since I came to New York, which was, as a reporter, which was quite a while ago. So I know him well. I am not a lawyer. We have a couple of lawyers here. And I want to introduce our distinguished panel. To the far right of me, which may or may not make sense, is the distinguished attorney George Conway III, who I'm sure you have seen on television many times. He is an old acquaintance of mine and super smart guy, and has a lot to say about the former president, as I think you know, particularly with respect to his legal problems. Immediately to my right is David Cay Johnston, another longtime friend. I'm proud to say a former columnist for the National Memo. He is a Pulitzer Prize-winning former reporter for the New York Times, a nationally recognized expert on tax and finance issues. He's written 2 books about Trump, and sorry. I knew I'd get something wrong. Hey, I asked you to correct this already, but he knows a lot about Trump's legal troubles, even though he's not a lawyer, but he lectures at Syracuse Law School, so he's highly qualified to talk to us about these topics. And then finally, last and absolutely not least, Rebecca Roiphe, a former prosecutor in the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, among other things, prosecuting securities fraud, so she certainly is qualified to talk about the former president, and now a professor at New York Law School, where she specializes in the role of prosecutors in society and how they fit into our democratic life. Really excellent panel. I'm very proud to be talking to them, and yes, that's right, you should applaud them. So the first thing I think I wanted to ask you all about is, and maybe you could take these in turn, is which case do you think, and you could pick more than one, is the most dangerous to the former president? Which poses the scariest problems for him? And maybe you can talk first, Rebecca.
Sure. I actually think it's the documents case, and I think it was a tactical error on the part of the Department of Justice to farm that one out to Florida, where it knew, or it should have known, it might get less immediate treatment or be slow-walked in the way it is. But that case is rock solid, and it's very clear when you look at it that any other person, were they anybody, would be prosecuted for this conduct, and that makes it a stronger barrier against the arguments and accusations that the Department of Justice is being weaponized as a political tool against the opponents of the Biden administration and its main competitor in the campaign.
George, can you go next? Because I want to amend the question a little bit for David.
Okay, I agree, and I think that the documents case is open and shut. I mean, the obstruction is clear on multiple occasions, the false certifications, the moving the documents around, the lying to your own lawyer, and there's just so much there. He doesn't stand. If that case ever goes to trial, he loses, and that's the only issue. The issue is, when is it going to go to trial? I mean, obviously the case that presents the most immediate danger to him will be the one in D.C., the insurrection case, which is not really an insurrection case, but it involves conspiracy to defraud the United States by lying about who won the election and trying to obstruct the congressional proceedings. That's going to go to trial sooner. That's the first one that's really going to go to trial, and he stands a very good chance of getting convicted in that one. But I agree, the documents case is much stronger.
David, first answer, and then I wanted to ask you something specific about this.
Oh, I'm with them. I'm with the lawyers here. And it is a slam dunk case if you can ever get it to trial. It's not the most important case. I think the most important case is the January 6th case, because we can't have presidents of the United States trying to overthrow the government. But the one that matters, that has the best chance of conviction, that's the case. And it's unfortunate it's probably going to be the last one tried, or certainly not the first.
And then I wanted to ask you specifically, and others can chime in, is about the civil case. Because even though that's not the top of the agenda here, I do think that's really important. And I'm wondering if you have a thought about what will happen when it goes to receiver. My feeling is he's already lost that case.
Yeah.
And,
Well,
but
Donald
please.
has lost the civil case. There's a finding of fact by the judge that he and his older two sons are persistent fraudsters. The issue here is disgorgement. Imagine you work for an employer.
What is disgorgement?
I'm going to explain. Imagine you work for an employer who shuts down Friday night and opens up on Monday morning. And so after the business is closed, you take $100 out of the till, you go down to Atlantic City, you win $1,000, you put the $100 back before the business opens. You could say, gee, nothing happened to the business, but you're a thief and
You're
an embezzler.
still an embezzler, right.
But the money you won in Atlantic City is not yours. It's ill-got gains you have to disgorge. And that's the issue that Judge Engoron has to address, is how much was there in ill-got gains? And then a receiver will eventually be appointed to sell these properties, and they're not going to sell at premium prices. They're going to
So
sell at
why
fire
does a
sale
receiver
prices.
have to be appointed?
Because that's
go
the way
there.
the New York State General Business Law establishes this. You and I can write articles or books under our own name, and we don't need any permission from the state.
Right.
But if you are a corporation, you are operating under the aegis of the state and by the grace of the state in allowing you to have a business. And Donald Trump no longer has business licenses.
So it wouldn't matter if he already had the money to pay whatever fines.
No,
Which we know he doesn't, but let's
Right.
say he did.
Irrelevant
It
issue.
doesn't matter. Okay.
Irrelevant issue.
No, he's out of business. That's the problem. He has.
I would just add that I think it was really smart of the Manhattan DA not to take this case criminally, because it was being investigated as a criminal case, and the civil laws are so much better suited, as well as the burden of proof, to effectuate this outcome. And so I just, I know there was a lot of upset among people that this wasn't charged criminally, but that was a really smart move in my mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I remember thinking that, this may not be such a bad thing that the criminal case doesn't go first, because look, this guy, Trump, pled the Fifth Amendment at his civil deposition before Letitia James, in Letitia James' case, 440 odd times, okay? And the burden of proof, as you point out, is not beyond a reasonable doubt. It's preponderance of the evidence, which means it's 50.0001% likely that he's a fraudster. Well, the guy pled the Fifth 440 times. He's done, and that's why the judgment, the substantive holding of the court of Judge Engoron, his ruling that Trump and his family and his businesses are persistent fraudsters, is irreversible. It cannot be reversed.
Right.
So, and it's just a question of, okay, what's the punishment? I mean, not the punishment because it's a civil case, but what's the remedy? The remedy is not being able to do business in the state of New York already is enough to punish him, to harm him and put him out of business. And if he gives up some of that money when they sell the assets, well, tough.
Yeah, and under New York general business law, Trump can't appeal the findings of fact by the judge. So the only thing he can hope for is the judge makes some legal error, and then he can only appeal to the state courts. There is no federal issue here. And the highest court in New York, here's 100 cases a year. They're not going to hear it. The intermediary court will, and they may well just hand it right back. Because there doesn't appear to me, and I assume there isn't to you, in Judge Engoron's decision to be any error.
So I have to ask you one last thing about this, which is, which building do you think the receiver will sell first? My hope is that it's 40 Wall Street for symbolic reasons, because that building, many years ago I exposed, was owned by Ferdinand Marcos, is secretly owned by Ferdinand Marcos, before Trump got it. So,
Well, one of the things people should know is Trump doesn't own most of Trump Tower. He sold the apartments, many of them to crooks. If you went to him and said, I want to buy an apartment in the name of Snow Inc., he didn't say, oh, is that a ski lodge in Colorado or a cocaine trafficking business?
or Kremlin Inc., but yes. So,
But he does own his apartment, and he owns the retail and commercial space, and rents are way down because people don't want to be associated with the building, so it's not going to bring good prices.
so Mar-a-Lago on the chopping block? What gets
It's
sold?
owned by one of those LLCs, yeah.
Yeah.
The Trump organization
We'll get
controls
a cool
everything.
$5 billion for that, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So this won't be a popular question, but what is his best defense in these cases, in your view, to any of them? I mean, he has several
Insanity.
defenses that.
I actually think he has a really good defense. I'm sorry, I know this isn't a popular position, but he has quite good defenses in the January 6th case. I think there are problems of proof there, and I know that my co-panelist, George, has written about the question of whether it is necessary that he knew the election was stolen or not, and there are some ways in which technically not, but I think it's very hard to win that case if you can't prove that he did on some level know it. I think the intent questions are difficult when there were a set of lawyers that were essentially going around telling him that this was an okay way to challenge the election. And remember, it's proof beyond a reasonable doubt. A unanimous jury has to decide this, so it only has to be one juror who is some level of doubt in order to tank that case. And I think that's, I think there are significant hurdles that are difficult in proving that case.
We haven't seen all the evidence in the January 6th case. My suspicion is that Jack Smith prosecutors have stuff that we have not yet seen that make clear that Trump said things that he knew he had lost the election. If they don't have it, then yeah, it's very problematic. And this is facts and circumstances, unlike the civil case, which was much more,
George, do you want to weigh in on this?
I agree and disagree at the same time with what I've just heard. I mean, I think you don't have to show, and you referred to an article that I co-wrote with Professor Eliason of Georgetown. The government does not have to prove that he believed deep down that he lost the election. Okay, they have to show that he made misstatements in trying to win the election after he lost it. And the best example I can come up with on this is like O.J. Simpson, not the murder case, but when he tried to get his memorabilia back and he held some people up at gunpoint at a hotel room in Las Vegas. He believed, I assume he believed that the stuff was his. Doesn't matter. He held people up at gunpoint. And that's the point with Trump. Trump used all sorts of illegal means, lying about specific instances of voter fraud, even though he was told 1 minute that there was no issue in Georgia, and the next minute he goes on and spouts out some lie. That's the intent that they actually need to show for conspiracy to defraud the United States and to lesser extent the
They also have documentary proof that Eastman told him he was lying. I mean, at one point, sent him a note saying, if you say this again, it's not true. So there is some proof.
But to go back to the broader point, there is evidence he knew he lost the election writ large. He said that to people. He said that to my ex-wife. He said it to Mark Milley. He said it to, I think, Cassidy. I mean, there are a lot of people who can testify and raise their right hands to say that, he said, oh, I can't believe I lost to this guy.
There's the redemption path for Kellyanne. That's nice.
No comment on that.
But what about his First Amendment defense or his, is there another defense for him that's plausible? I think the Georgia case is very bad for him, so tell me if I'm wrong about that. So,
I mean, the First Amendment defense, again, there are limits to everybody's First Amendment right, and at this point, I think people who have been following this understand that, if you are lying in order to commit a crime, that is not protected by the First Amendment. Fraud is not protected by the First Amendment just because it's committed through speech, and that's a limit to our First Amendment rights. But I do think, again, the problems of proof come, and it's not that I think it's a terrible case, I think it's a strong case, but the weaknesses of the case come in that connection between what he said and a crime that he actually committed, because it's not as clear as robbing a bank, right? I mean, it's very clear that robbing a bank in the OJ example or whatever it is, those things are clearly illegal. But he was being told by lawyers that he could do this, that this was a way to contest the election. And while we can all say, this was a clown car full of lawyers, I mean, if that's what you think, that is not necessarily what every juror is going to think. And I think that the First Amendment argument has at least, even though if they can prove their case, it's not a real issue. But if they have problems of proof, we back right back into the First Amendment problem.
So what do we think about the Georgia case now? I mean, I feel, first of all, that people are starting to flip in that case, which is another whole topic of who's going to flip and who isn't. my view is that the Georgia case is powerful, and partly because you have him on tape, blackmailing and bullying the public officials there, but that's not the only reason.
So conspiracy law is written to try to get people in the conspiracy to rat each other out. Right. And that's what you're seeing, is people ratting each other out because they don't want to go to prison, and they may have been minor characters. And everyone in a conspiracy, unless they have clearly renounced, who does any act, even if they don't know anybody else in the conspiracy, is equally culpable. And so the problem Trump's going to have is, I think you're going to see more people come in and make deals that will harm Trump. And I don't think we should be surprised if we end up with a trial of one person, Donald Trump.
We think Rudy's going to flip? That's what I'm...
So I hate that I keep being the like doom and gloom, but I actually have worries about that case as well. And I don't know if anybody followed the Varsity Blues case with the parents who were bribing the college admissions for their kids, but there was a case that just held that there were smaller conspiracies, but that the prosecutors hadn't successfully connected these particular defendants to the broader conspiracy. And I think that could be a problem here too. This is charged as one big RICO charge, a racketeering charge, which is similar to conspiracy, but requires that you connect each little arm, each little piece to a national conspiracy to overturn the election. Did each of these players really know that they were partaking in a national effort to overturn the results of the election? Maybe, but that seems like it's going to be hard to prove, and maybe the best bet is all of these people fall before they have to get to the point where they prove that against anybody else but Donald Trump. But I worry that also the way that this is going to proceed, because there are so many defendants in bits and pieces, is going to make it harder strategically for the prosecutor to prove.
But they don't have to convict all of them, right? They can just convict him.
Well, that's absolutely true, but it becomes, it's going to look really bad if they start to get a lot of acquitals or charges dropped early on. That's not, as a prosecutor, you do not want that to happen.
They're starting to flip down there.
Well,
my favorite one being David Bossie's brother-in-law, who was the first to flip. But George, what do you make of the Georgia case?
I agree somewhat with that case is somewhat problematic because of its complexity. It's just very, I like the Jack Smith case better because it's one defendant and it focuses on what he did. I like that better.
But they do have him on tape in the Georgia case.
They do have him on tape in the Georgia case.
My view of the tape is that it's not ambiguous.
You don't need a RICO conspiracy to put him into jail for that.
Well, but then they have all these other things that happen.
One of the things to watch for in the Georgia case is how quickly the prosecutors are able to present their opening argument. I've seen too many trials where it takes so long to lay out the facts that I think inherently to some jurors, if it's that complicated, then there must be some other explanation. And so hopefully that when they come to trial, they will be very efficient and focused on the presentation of the facts in all of these cases, but the Georgia case in particular.
And there's also going to be an interesting dynamic because the case essentially is going to get tried multiple times because of, they can't try them all at once, and they're going to try a couple defendants here who who've insisted on their speedy trial rights, and they're going to try some more later, and then one with Trump. And, it's going to be, both sides will learn from those trials, and each trial, even though it's supposed to be proving the same overall RICO conspiracy, is going to have to have different focuses because of who the defendants are, because you do have to tie the individual defendants who are sitting in the dock for that case to this overall thing.
I think it's worth taking a pause for a second to talk also about that phone call. The way he talks about it, that it's a perfect phone call, and he said this again, doubled down in that CNN town hall on this point. And the way he speaks in such sort of unclear half phrases, broken up, this does actually weirdly provide him with a way out, because what he's trying to say he meant was, look, I won all of these votes, and you don't have to find all of them for me, but I know I won it, so just find me the ones this is the number that I need.
It's true. You go through any transcript of this guy, it's like you cannot figure out what he's saying when you actually look at it.
All I'm saying is the way that he talks makes that plausible when anybody else.
And then there's the flip side of it. There's the way he talks and what shows up on the transcript, which is usually gibberish, and then prosecutors are trying to prove what's going on in his head.
But on the other side,
So
we have
in
no
that, so
idea
in,
what's
so in
going on.
that, so in that way,
on
the
the other
testimony
side
of
of it-
other people does matter, right? About what his mens rea and all those factors.
There's nothing up there. Okay?
Right.
I mean,
right. There also, we've had
That's-
lots of
that's a
mob
big problem.
trials, and I've read lots of mob trial transcripts where it's really much more muddled than Donald. So they still get convictions in those cases, and I think that goes to the skill of the prosecutors in
but fortunately, he
focusing.
keeps making incriminating statements every day. So that's
He's the best,
Right. No,
best,
he's-
the
Very good
best
no
consultant
one
the
makes better
prosecution has.
incriminating statements than he does.
So let's talk for a minute, and I know you guys are not political reporters, but you're all political people and you understand politics well. Why do you think the prosecutions of Trump have so far seemed to have little impact on his political viability? Or maybe you don't agree with that, and I'd be interested in that too. But
Well, we're people up here who live in our minds and deal in policy issues. Most Americans, they live with their gut, and these are visceral issues to most Americans, and we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that, when Trump got through the Electoral College, 90% of Americans only got 50 weeks pay compared to 1973. And they no longer had pensions on top of their wages. They paid for health care out of their wages instead of getting it on top. They're hurting. And these are long-term problems created by both parties. Donald, secondly, appeals to people who want to be able to use slurs against people they don't like because of their race, their religion, whatever. And then, of course, even though he says that Christians in writing are fools, idiots, and schmucks, and says his life philosophy is revenge, which is anti-Christian, he has all these fake Christian ministers out there calling him, some of them literally saying he's God's agent, he's the savior.
right.
And you're not dealing
Orange
there with the
Jesus.
kind of rational
So
analysis we all do for a living.
So you're saying he has a general imperviousness to these?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that's true, but I also think he's exploited a vulnerability in our federal criminal justice system, which is that our federal prosecution is embedded in the executive under the president. And so there is a way in which when he says this is the Biden administration, it resonates, and it means that the very same vulnerability that made it such that people thought he was manipulating the Mueller investigation and other prosecutions allows him now to turn it on its head and make it look as if this is one political party, political person, the president of the United States, one administration going out of it after its chief rival, and I think that's resonating. I think people are, think that there's some truth to that.
I agree.
It's all projection. Yeah, that's what he does.
Yeah.
Everything is like everything he would do. He ascribes those motives and actions.
But then
to other
there's
people.
so then there's a question of, okay, we know what he does, but why is it? And George, this is somewhat directed to you as someone I know to have been and perhaps still is a member of the Federalist Society. Why is it that so many of the elites on the right, in the right, are willing to, give him a pass on these crimes? I mean, that's one of the, to me, surprising things about all of this.
It's a shocking thing to me. I mean, if you had told me that he was going to go to jail someday, he was going to. By 2019, I was pretty convinced that's where he was going to go. But the notion that people still will defend him or not cast him aside is just absurd to me. But there's a lot of different reasons. I mean, there's fear, there's grift, and there's also an unwillingness to admit error, because when you're wrong with Donald Trump, you're really wrong, okay? And if around dinner tables across the country, they don't want to talk about Trump. The people who support Trump don't really want to talk about Trump because they don't want to face the truth about him that they know deep down. And I think that's part of what you're seeing when you see these polls that say that he has this constant support, and they're going to support him over DeSantis and all these other people. But at some point, I think there's an exhaustion among some percentage of that that at the end it's going to fall away.
So if we get a trial before the Republican convention, let's say, and a conviction, will that affect what happens to him politically? Just because we're nearing the end here, and I wonder what people think about that. In the general election.
I think we're in very uncharted territory there. You would think that should be the end of it, but it may not be. And nothing prevents Donald Trump, while incarcerated, from serving as President of the United States.
Right.
That's a very important point people shouldn't lose. George makes a very important point, by the way. Donald Trump's the greatest con artist in the history of the world. And one of the most difficult things in the world for victims of a con is to admit it, because you're then essentially saying, oh, I was stupid.
Yeah.
And that's a real fundamental thing helping him.
Absolutely.
Denial.
It is the most important thing, helping him. But I'll go back to your point about, I know we don't have much time left, about whether he can serve incarcerated. No, he wouldn't have to serve incarcerated. If he's elected President of the United States, I believe that under the Constitution, they'd have to spring him whether he's in Georgia State Prison or in a federal prison, because he's president. And you simply can't,
Okay.
you can't restrict him from.
You could defer his
You could defer his sentence, you could do that, but you have to spring him.
Okay.
But being a
you
convicted
have these
felon doesn't
OLC
stop
memos that you all know. The OLC, the Office of Legal Counsel in the Department of Justice, has basically said a sitting president can't go on trial.
Right.
I'm not sure that's right, but I'm pretty sure that no court is going to hold that you can incarcerate a sitting president of the United
All right.
States.
We have 30 seconds. I need some hope for this audience, okay? Because
Some what?
some hope. A word of
Get
encouragement.
out the vote. You win elections when you get out the vote.
Well, I don't know. I've been the voice of doom and gloom and lack of hope for the entire panel, so I'm going to try to summon some hope. I mean, I really do think the vast majority of American people, when they focus on it, are not interested in these, sort of tribal warfare, and they really do care about rule of law values. It's just harder message to send, so I think that the more that we send that, the better.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. Just keep hammering away. This man is a sick man. He's deranged. He's delusional. He is demented. He is you have to just point it out and never stop.
Yeah, you're gonna right. So you all have your marching orders. Thank you for being a wonderful audience. We appreciate it. Thank you so much, and thank you to the panel. You guys were great, of course.